Look, I'm just a geologist. I like rocks. I love rocks.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. See, this is why I shouldn't be in charge of doing the intro.
No, this is perfect. This is perfect. Good morning, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Whatever time of day it is for you.
Hello.
Welcome to the Flannelcast.
Well, we got an action-packed episode. We've already introduced our good friend Shannon George, but I guess for the post commercial intro, we'll introduce Shannon George again. We're hanging out with Shannon. Shannon, you're down in Virginia.
There
I
she
am
is.
a professional geologist licensed in the state of Texas and Georgia, and I am a member at large with the National Association of State Boards of Geology. So,
Asbog.
I don't hold a position on a state board, but I am involved with the exam and promoting awareness for professional licensure in geology.
And there is no better way to promote awareness than on a geology podcast. Am I correct?
I was very excited to be invited to speak with y'all.
Excellent. Shannon, you did your undergrad in geology, correct? And did you have a minor too or something?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Temple University with a minor in Spanish.
Spanish, that's what it was.
Yeah.
I wanted to say it, but I was like, no, that sounds weird. But nope, that's correct. And then you did your master's at the University at Buffalo?
I did.
Sorry, right? Is that correct? University at Buffalo. I always
University at Buffalo.
Yeah.
Also in geology with a concentration in hydrogeology.
Hydrogeology. So there's water in the rocks?
There is water underground.
Dum. More to come on that.
Changes everything.
Before we jump into the professional geology and all that wonderful world, do we have a Jesse's Corner for today?
Yes.
Do we have the Jesse's Corner music queued up?
Oh,
Chris?
yeah. Do you
I gotta get around. I recorded something, but
Ooh, I'm on the edge of my seat.
I didn't finish it yet. Finish it.
Well,
Shannon, you have like 2 ukes and a guitar behind you. Can you just bust something out real quick?
None of them are tuned right now.
Sorry. Yeah, it's all just.
so my corner this week is controversy. Get ready. Everyone is talking about this. And by everyone, I mean no one really. So there's a famous sort of interval in the rock record called the Great Unconformity.
Mm-hmm.
We eat a lot out west, and it's basically just a billion years of missing time, give or take, a few 100 million years. And so one of the questions is, where did all this crust go? Why don't we have any rock record from about a billion years ago up through, I want to say like 650 million years ago.
Well, how about we just slow your roll, Jesse? All right.
Oh.
So why don't we just break it down real fast in case the listeners don't know what an unconformity is?
Oh,
Great point.
that's when something doesn't conform. Moving on.
Do you want me to take this, or you want to jump on this?
You've already butted in.
I'm pretty sure he covered it and said it's missing time, but
I feel like, didn't we just cover unconformities? Like,
I don't know. What if this is the listeners' first time they're listening?
I think our last episode in like 2017 was on uniformitarianism or something.
That's a great one.
It is. Listen, they're all great.
We talked about it on the listener questions, uniformitarianism.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. All right. Sorry, Chris. Carry on. What is an unconformity?
All right. Basically, well, since you asked, Steve, an unconformity is when there's like it's like a gap in the rock record. So it can either be like an erosional event kind of cut down and then new sediment was deposited on top of that, or you just didn't have anything being deposited for a really long time. You're just in an environment where there was no sediment deposition. So I like saying that, I like telling my students, it's almost like if you're reading an American history textbook and you get to the War of 1812, and then all of a sudden you flip the page and then it's the Vietnam War. You're like, whoa, what something's missing here. And that's kind of, I use
the same analogy. I don't use wars, But I say, yeah,
Well,
It was 150 years of peace.
yeah. If geology, is if the layers of rocks are pages in books that tell the story, unconformities are just pages that have been ripped out.
Mhm.
And so that's either pages that have been ripped out, that would be erosion. They were written, they were there, and then they got taken out. Or non-deposition would be no one wrote those pages, blank pages.
Ooh, nobody wrote them.
I like it. So you just go page 1, page 2, page 3, page
It's a very
17, page
very
18.
in-depth analogy that takes 2 classes. Just so I don't have to talk about things.
Yeah. So for all of
okay.
Jesse's future students, just listen to this podcast and you can skip 2 classes.
So there's a couple different types of unconformities. I don't think we need to get into those, right? But
We did cover up some of them in our recent episode number 40, I believe it was, the listener questions, where angular
Okay.
nonconformity
Yeah.
or disconformity or
but,
nonconformity.
there's an unconformity. It's so great they call it the Great Unconformity.
So great.
So great.
It's really grand.
So, are you done?
I'm done. I'm passing the baton to you, big guy.
So you see it a lot out west, especially where you have beautiful exposed rock and stratigraphy. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, whether you knew it or not, you were looking at it. The Great Unconformity is present there. It's present in everywhere out west, basically. And it depends on where you're at, how much time is missing. It's anywhere from, a little over 1 billion years to maybe a couple 100 million years. But it is still this huge gap of time. And so there was always a lot of question, what happened to the rock? Where did it go? Or was it not present to begin with? And so for a long time, it was thought, until fairly recently, there was a study as recently as 2018 or 2019 that explained it as an erosional event with Snowball Earth. Which, do you want to talk about Snowball Earth, or should I?
Go ahead. You're on a roll right now.
Okay, so Snowball Earth is this really interesting time period. It's one of my favorites. It was just basically it was we had most of the Earth is covered by ice, if not ice. We're in this global runaway. It was because of a runaway albedo effect.
So it was like 1993.
Yeah.
Where nobody swam.
Swimming. No one went swimming. But basically,
Not confirmed.
glaciers started forming, and because they're lighter in color, white or clear, they reflect more sunlight. You reflect more sunlight, you have less solar insolation, so it becomes colder. The glaciers grow. You reflect more sunlight. It's a feedback loop where it keeps growing on itself.
So real quick, fun fact: there's a Young MC song, and there's this line in it that says, "You say Nito, take your libido and roll to the church in your new tuxedo." When I was a kid, I thought it was, "You say Nito, take your albedo and roll to the church in your new tuxedo." And I was always like, what does albedo mean? And I looked it up. It's like, no, because when you're a kid, I didn't know what libido meant either. So, so every time I hear the word albedo, I start thinking of Young MC in my head. But
the reflectivity of a surface.
Yeah, what are you going to do? You got to bust a move.
Yeah.
So our next episode is going to be a biology episode for Steve, involving birds and bees and.
But
sorry, that was my little digression. Carry on.
So anyhow, there's some thought, it's still unknown whether or not, everywhere was covered in ice. Did the oceans freeze, or was it more of like were the oceans like slushy, so they were starting to freeze a bit? And it lasted, almost 100 million years. The onset was 700 plus million years ago, and it 720, and then we come out of it around 630. If you're keeping score of dates, I just did a lecture on geologic time.
Oh, I did too.
Yeah, I've got all
today actually.
I've got all these numbers in my head. But we actually refer to it in the geologic time scale as the cryogean. So cryo meaning cold or frozen. So it's the frozen period. So anyhow,
that's in the Precambrian, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's toward the tail end.
Yeah. And we come out of it because of volcanism, pumping CO2, warming up the Earth. But anyhow, so it was thought that coming out of Snowball Earth, and during Snowball Earth, you have glaciation, so that's a major agent of erosion. And then coming out of it, you have water that adds another erosional feature as these things melt. And so that was always thought to be kind of the case for the Great Unconformity, because it's right in this time period. And we start depositing right after Snowball Earth, or a little bit after, in the Cambrian explosion. And so it was always thought, all right, this missing time was probably erosional. But wait, there's now a new study that's casting doubt on this, and it just came out last week. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, beginning of May. And so, this study does something really cool. I didn't even know this was possible. So it looks at thermochronology. So it's looking at how hot these rocks got. And that's a function of if they're buried. And so they can sort of tell the burial history and when they got buried, and then when they get exhumed, when they got unburied. And it used helium-4, which I didn't know was even an isotope of. I didn't know helium.
Oh, okay. So that's what you mentioned for the last
Yeah.
podcast was helium-4. Yeah, okay.
Helium-4. And so what they're finding, they took samples from Pikes Peak out in Colorado, and they found the ages of these rocks had been, the overlying rocks had been eroded before Snowball Earth. Dun, dun, dun. So it's not Snowball Earth that's the major agent of erosion, at least in this case.
Okay.
So the erosion took place before the freezing event.
Do they have any?
What?
So
Was there another snowball?
No. There's the possibility that we had some earlier snowballs, but their basic hypothesis is that it lines up with the formation and breaking up of Rodinia. And so you have this,
God rest its soul.
Yeah, just general supercontinent formation. So, you have uplift and then erosion and just general weathering and tectonics driving.
Kind of makes me a little sad. Like, that's like, wah, wah.
So my question is, I didn't read this story, but they so I'm just going to make general assumptions here. You know what happens when you assume.
Yeah. You're awesome.
Yes. Things turn out grand. Right. Yes. So did they take samples from anywhere else, or was it just?
Not that I saw. I saw they were just looking at zircons from.
There must have been something then. There must have been something extra if they're making like this like grandiose.
Yeah, I haven't looked up. I should.
They took samples from one location and they're making global implications.
I'll dig up the actual article. I read it in, just a pop sci article, but I'll go to the journal because you deserve the full story.
No, and that is a good point, Chris. It's like someone like an alien civilization coming down to like Delaware County and assuming that everyone in America says water. Like, no. That's not how you pronounce it.
It's a very small pocket of America, by the way, because I've lived in several other places outside of Philadelphia, and that is a Philadelphia gem right there.
Yeah, you got all that water all over you. You gotta use your towel, dry it off.
Full of spots in New Jersey too.
Yeah,
sure. South Jersey, yeah. I'll have some water ice, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knows what water ice is.
So, the one day,
lots of people know what water ice is.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you live in the greater Philadelphia area, but if you're outside of there,
or Florida.
Like, what is water ice?
It's two different phases of water.
Shaved Italian ice.
Yeah. It's both liquid and solid. And one day, when my daughter came home from school, and she said water, and I was like, "That's it, we're moving." Gotta My Fair Lady have some allocution lessons.
My son the other day said milk, and I almost smacked him.
There's nothing wrong with saying milk.
There is a lot of things wrong with saying
milk. MELK.
Yes.
Never heard of that one. That's a new one.
Shannon, how do you say that liquid that comes out of a cow's udder?
Milk.
Yes, milk. Thank you.
Yeah, throw the E in there.
Yeah,
Milk.
The one that
but,
really,
but somehow water is terrible.
the one that really makes me think is when people say Washington.
I don't get
Warsh. I had a friend who said warsh.
Where?
Yeah. Don't get my shoes all dirty. My mom's gotta wash them.
Yeah, I had a teacher in high school that said that, and I never understood, like, there's no U's there.
Yeah. Well, we all had a geochemistry professor who said, "What?" He over exaggerated his WHs.
The H before
When?
the W.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So helium-4 is just I got to look more into that because how rare is helium?
I mean, it's the
Super
second-
rare. So how rare is helium-4?
I mean,
the second most common element in the universe, if you want to be most technical.
Not in the Earth's crust. It's not one of the 9 of 99. Let's put it that way.
you go to Party City, you get a can of helium, you're good to go. It's
Yeah.
really not that
Sure.
rare at all.
Just pumping it
There's-
into the earth and messing with people.
No,
I think
there you go.
there's a helium shortage right now.
There's a helium shortage forever.
Yeah.
There's nothing making new helium.
Isn't it that when helium's released, it actually leaves the Earth's atmosphere and
Yes.
just
It's very light. I mean, all gases would eventually go off if they weren't recycled by essentially plate tectonics and life now.
climate and
Yeah.
um,
What
All
have
right.
you done for me lately?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting thing where they're looking at basically the minerals. They're using helium to thorium and uranium and certain minerals as a paleothermometer.
Helium to thorium?
I don't know. I'll have to.
Is that like a radioactive decay thing? It decays to helium? Like it
well,
pops off of helium, maybe? I don't know.
Again, I didn't
Yeah.
read it enough.
Anyway, no, it's interesting. So the
Yeah,
Great
it's-
Unconformity was a super awesome story. Now it's just like play two.
I mean, Snowball Earth is cool on its own, and one of the ways.
But is it cool now? It's not as cool as it was 10 minutes ago.
Well, it's always going to be.
by definition, it's cool.
Yeah.
Earth.
No, I get it,
Right.
but 10
Right.
minutes ago it accommodated 1 billion years worth of non-deposition. Now it's just like
Well, I
it
mean,
got cold.
the
I
glaciers,
had to put on a jacket. I couldn't go
glaciers still
swimming.
grinded, and the water melted. The water's got to go somewhere, right?
I guess. No, it's still cool. It's just not as cool as it was. I'm sorry.
Part of there's an interesting.
Peterson, you're dead to me. I think it's still pretty cool, all right?
One of the lines of evidence was they were finding drop stones, and I want to say like Namibia or somewhere.
They
and-
find drop stones all over the place from Snowball Earth. And
Yeah,
that's
it's pretty-
one of the ways they came up with that hypothesis.
Yeah. So a drop stone, just for real quick reference here, we've talked about this enough, is when a part of a glacier breaks off at the ocean, that broken off piece becomes an iceberg. And a lot of times the sediment it has eroded is stuck to the bottom of it. And so as that iceberg floats out into the ocean, it starts to melt, and pieces of those sediments will then just fall to the bottom of the ocean, and they land in the sediment, and you have cobbles and boulders sometimes that are just really out of place surrounded by all this ocean sediment. And so they preserve, you might have like a shale that looks like the bottom of the ocean floor with just a boulder in the middle of it.
Yeah. So if you think about it, it's like the glacier's digestive system. It eats all these rocks.
Explain yourself. I don't know what you're
It
talking
eats
about.
all these rocks, and then it processes them, and then it
Oh,
drops them out of it.
so okay.
Come on.
No, I like it. It's good. It's good.
Just think of like Pac-Man, eating rocks, taking them all inside of itself, and then
I've
it
never,
gets to the point where like, okay, well, now I'm done. So now I'm going to excrement this stuff out of me.
So, Shannon, about the PG.
I was just about to say I've never seen Pac-Man poop, but
Ah, you've never made it that far in the game, huh?
it's a bonus level.
eats enough of those pellets, man. It's yeah. Sorry. All right, that was a terrible digression, but
Perfect segue.
Perfect segue.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
let's talk about the fact that Shannon, for the first time on this podcast, I am relevant.
You were going to
Don't
say
get
somebody
used to
was
it.
wearing a bolo tie for the
Oh,
first time
no,
on the
first of all,
show.
yes,
Awesome.
yes.
I thought that was a bolo tie. you were wearing.
Yes. No,
Very
that is
fancy, very nice.
that is another first. No, Mr. Dr. Thornburg and Dr. Semenak, who cares about a PhD? They're not a PG, but you and I are, and that's what really
We
matters in the world of geology, right? When it comes to the day-to-day actual people getting the work done. Let's face it.
There's probably some truth to that.
There's a lot of different aspects of the professional geologist license that we could talk about, but I do like the fact that you're emphasizing how important it is.
It is important. Listen, I graduated college after a long time, and started in 96, graduated in 2010. So, just under a decade and a half, which is, about average from what I hear for geology majors. And
So you're like the original Van Wilder.
exactly. If you had any idea how many times I've been called that. But I didn't feel like a geologist until I passed that exam. And then I felt like vindicated. And I have a master's degree in geology too. Like even then it was like, okay. Yeah, I that's cool. I have a master's degree. Like, all right, I feel like a geologist. But then once I got that PG certificate, like, then I felt like, oh, I'm vindicated. I took a test that tells me I know what I'm doing. So
It means a lot in our industry, especially if you're in consulting geology and a lot of other industries such as mining geology. When I was an undergraduate and even through grad school, I didn't even know what a professional geologist license was. And that was one of the reasons why I was excited to come on the podcast, is to bring awareness to the undergrads and graduate students out there that earning your PG is a big part of career development. And it's something worth considering for people, all geoscientists, to consider obtaining as part of their career.
Absolutely. We have had a few
even academics should consider it. And, it's not something that's as common in academia, but I know quite a number of college professors who have their PG, who are also involved with the ASBOG as members at large.
I've definitely looked into it. Isn't there a professional work requirement though?
Yes.
And I think that's a stumbling block.
There are 3 major elements to professional licensure in general. But
drop those bombs. What are they?
So they say it's the 3 E's, and it's education, experience, and examination. And so to obtain any type of a license, which is many career paths are regulated on a state level.
Yeah,
barbers,
barbers, MDs, lawyers,
engineers, teachers.
Yeah.
And geology is one of those careers that has certain regulatory requirements in each state. And to, sit for the exam, you have to have a certain amount of education experience, a certain amount of work experience. Jesse, to answer your question, that element of work experience involves working under the supervision of a licensed professional geologist or engineer for we geologists. And
I think Jesse should work for me for the next 5 years. And then bada bing, bada boom. There you go.
If you all work together, there's a possibility, if you've collaborated enough on certain projects, that some of that time would count towards working under the supervision of a professional geologist. Some academic departments are lucky enough to have maybe 1 PG in the department, and people in departments collaborate all the time, and that could count towards your time.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I thought we'd get to this later, but I can make it quick is that, you know, a lot of academics feel that there's no real reason for them to have a PG license, but if they did, they could be involved with assisting ASBOG and writing the Fundamentals of Geology exam. Also, their PhD students could gain experience credits if their advisor has a PG license for certain types of research. You know, maybe a state board would count some or all of that time that a PhD student was working under their advisor or a postdoctoral student or something like that. So
That's a great point.
just to bring it around, that there's lots of reasons for all geoscientists to consider taking the fundamentals and practice of geology exams as part of, you know, their career path considerations.
Yeah, and honestly, think of how many students pass through geology programs. How many of them go on to get their PhDs? Just percentage-wise, maybe generously say 10%. The other 90% are going to end up going into the field of geology. And if you're a professor who has a PG, you know what goes into that exam, and therefore that's going to be very helpful for those 90% of your students who are going to go on and go into that field and are going to need to, you know, they don't need to take that exam, but if they take that exam, it's a huge leg up. Like, go ahead.
I was just going to say, plus they have, they know it's relevant, and they can say, like, this is something you should think about. Like when I was, especially when I was doing my master's, like when I went to do my PhD, I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. But when I was doing my master's, I still didn't really know what it was, because no one had explained it to me.
It's not commonplace for universities to really teach students about what the professional geology license is, and it's changing, and some departments are better than others. Steve, your statistic was pretty spot on. I believe it's 11% of all geoscientists go into academia go to get their PhD. So
I just pulled
pretty
that
spot on there.
I know I'd heard that stat before, but I don't know when.
and so you have about 90% of all geoscientists going into industry or working for national labs or working for consulting firms or regulatory agencies, mines, oil and gas.
It's just good, like, career planning and career development, because as a student, you can take the field. What's the first part?
The fundamentals of geology.
Yeah, and so that's a really amazing idea that you brought up, Jesse, and I was really hoping to get around to this. So there's two parts to getting your, there's two exams. One is called the Fundamentals of Geology, Steve said, and the second is the practice. Now, if we just talk about the FG, the fundamentals, for a while, you can take that exam right after you graduate with your bachelor's degree. And so you don't need any work experience to take the Fundamentals of Geology exam. And in fact, a lot of state geology boards will allow students to take the fundamentals in their senior year. Right. So as long as they have a certain amount of credits of geology classes, in a lot of states, you can sit for the FG exam before you even graduate. And that is a great thing to put on your resume. Employers love to see that you've passed the FG. Even if you don't plan on going on to take the PG, if you have that FG on your resume, employers know that you're above average, that you can study for and complete a task, and that you have a solid understanding of the fundamental concepts in geology.
Yeah, and the PE is maybe slightly better known, the professional engineering certification, and that's a part of a lot of undergraduate engineering programs, is that they have to take their FE, which is the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, before they graduate. They have to take it and they have to pass it. And honestly, I took the FG in I don't even know when, a long time ago, but it was a long time after I graduated. And a lot of the fundamentals of geology are those, it's your intro to geology textbook, like super condensed. It's all the classes you ever took in undergrad condensed into an exam, and then you have to take this exam. So the proper time I feel to take that exam is right after you graduate, or like Shannon said, like in your senior year.
Or within a year, somewhere during your senior year of college, I took mine a year after I graduated, and I felt like that was a good amount of time. I was still fresh enough out of school.
And there's always going to be gaps. Like for instance, where I went to undergrad and grad school, they didn't talk about economic geology basically at all, but there's a section on the exam about economic geology. So there are going to be little tiny gaps you're going to need to brush up on, but that's what makes you a well-rounded geologist, filling in those gaps.
And each state has a requirement for the type of education that a person needs to receive in order to sit for the FG exam. Some of them require a degree in geology. Other degrees that tend to be accepted are geological engineering and engineering geology. And some states, licensure is a state issue. And so each state regulations are pretty similar, but they are different. And so depending on what state you live in or plan on working in, you need to go to the state board website. You just type in whatever your state is, Board of Geology, and go right to their webpage. And all the regulations and requirements are pretty spelled out in plain language on most boards' websites. And so, some of the states require a degree in geological sciences. Some require very specific classes. Some have a whole list of courses, and if you've taken 7 out of the 11 that they require, then you're eligible to sit. So it's hard to make blanket statements about who is eligible for the FG, but just because your degree is in geology doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be excluded from being able to take the exam.
Right. Don't most states require some sort of field camp or field methods type class? Or at least I know the couple of states that I've been trying to get. I mean, I'm licensed in Pennsylvania. I'm trying to get reciprocity in Delaware now.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be a big stumbling block for a lot of students. Like a lot of students say your geology major requires, Calc 2, Physics 2, and field camp. Like those are big hurdles. And, maybe you don't take them and you get a BA in environmental science or BS in environmental science instead of taking that field camp class. But then to take the PG, at least in Pennsylvania and some other states, you need to take that field camp class. So it is something that should be discussed at the college level. Be like, listen, I know you just want to skip this one thing or this one class because it's not your jam, but if you skip that one class or that one thing, you may be hamstringing yourself in your career for the next 40 years. So
it is important to think long term, and most states do require some form of field methods or field camp.
Right.
But it does vary by state. I have this awesome list it's a general list, again, can't be applied to every state, but it's the top 7 classes that people who are considering licensure should probably take in order to ensure that they would have a really good chance at being eligible to take the exam. So
is number 1 how to podcast?
Number 1, physical geology.
Okay.
Number 2, historical geology. Mineralogy or earth materials, field geology, geologic mapping or field methods, igneous and metamorphic petrology, sedimentary petrology or sedimentology, and structural geology. So those are all pretty basic geology.
I didn't take sedimentary
courses.
petrology until grad school, but the other ones all took in undergrad. So
A lot of universities have paleostrat or paleontology and stratigraphy grouped into one course, and that typically qualifies as a sedimentology course.
yeah, and I did have that.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, you were in my said paleostrat class. Sorry, spoiler alert. I'm dating Shannon. Except I was like 40 when I took that class. She was not.
So Shannon, I have a question for you. When you get the PG license, for the listeners out there, what does that allow you to do that you wouldn't be able to do without that license?
Well, again, states, a lot of states, it's 32 states that have licensing for professional geologists, and there is a whole slew of items that you need to have a license for. Installing water supply wells, anything that has to do with public health and safety. So building site conceptual models for the subsurface, the geology for building construction, geotechnical projects, which would be slope stability, which has a lot to do with highway. And a lot of clients and certain contracts require that the work is done under the supervision of a professional geologist. And
Yeah, a lot of requirements, Chris, like for brownfield investigations or like Superfund sites, things like that. A lot of them require PEs, professional engineers, and PGs. Like you need both. And then if it requires some sort of ecological component, then you need somebody who's can fill that requirement as well. But when I worked in industry, I now work for a state. But when I worked in industry, I sat next to somebody who was getting her PE, and I was talking about getting my PG, and they're like, "Well, why would you even do that? Like, I'm going to be an engineer. I can sign and seal documents." And I'm like, PGs can sign and seal documents. Like, there's a lot of things that you can't do without a PG's signature.
potentiometric maps,
Exactly. There's a lot.
boring logs, subsurface boring logs for drilling projects. In most cases, those have to be signed and stamped by a professional geologist.
Exactly. Think of like any like subway system or any sort of big building that needs to be built, or basically almost any big engineering project needs a PG as well, because they need to sign off on what's the subsurface. So,
I mean, other reasons to get your professional geologist degree is a lot of employers really like their employees to be on the PG track or have the ability to achieve a PE. You're more valuable to your employer if you have a professional geologist license because you can do more for them. So say if you work for a consulting company and your client base changes over time based on economics, you might be doing one type of project that does not necessarily require a PG, but then this industry starts booming or this industry starts booming, and the state or federal regulations that govern that certain industry may require a PG. So you have increased flexibility in your career. It's more easy to change jobs if you have your professional geologist license.
promotions are faster.
Pay tends to be higher if you
Yes.
have your PG license, and it puts you more on equal ground with engineers because engineers are licensed in all 50 states. And our job descriptions overlap, so it gets a little interesting when you read the regulations, but there is a clear separation between PEs and PGs, and kind of just levels us up and allows us to do high-level geologic work on engineering projects. So it allows the PGs and PEs to be able to collaborate more effectively.
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely a career track for those who have the potential to become PGs and those who do not, both from industry and the governmental regulatory side of it. There are people who can hit the PG track, and if they don't, that's fine, but they're on the track with everyone else who can't hit the PG track. And I see it. I've seen it a lot, both in industry and at the state level or regulatory level, where like, well, I can't go any further in my career because I don't have a PG. And it's like, I understand, but you could remedy that. You could go back to school and take the classes that are necessary to then sit for the exam and do this thing. So to be able to do it when you're young and do it when you're, when the whole process is designed to get those classes done when you're an undergrad and get it out. And, that's the track you should take. But just because you didn't take that track doesn't mean that you can't. You can go back. You can take that field methods class. You can take that field camp. You can take that, igneous and metamorphic petrology class at, your local university and get that requirement done, and then go sit for the exam. And
some states will allow experience if you have an X number of years of experience. Right. I mean, you can work with the board. And one of the great parts about the boards is that it seems like a really mysterious government entity, but if you call them up, they are the friendliest people most of the time, and they will help you get that application done, and they'll really help you understand if you're eligible or not.
Yep, they will. And I have dealt with them, and I'm dealing with reciprocity right now. I'm trying to get my reciprocity from one state to another state, and they've been fantastic. So I can't say enough about it.
And reciprocity, for those of you who don't know, are when you have your
Thank you, Shannon.
geology license in one state. So you've sat for the exam and passed the exam in one state, and you are now a professional geologist, and you want or need to obtain your license in a different state for whatever reason. You moved or you want to do work there, and basically that requires filling out a bunch of paperwork to show that your education and experience requirements and examination requirements are equivalent to their requirements. And the great thing is that all the states who have a PG exam use the ASBOG exam. So everyone's taking the same exam. And so you already have that exam box checked. And it's basically just
right, because
double checking your experience and education requirements.
But not only that, when you get your certificate in the mail, and I have a funny story about that, they have different categories like hydrology, economic geology, this, that, there, I forget how many there are. Shannon, do you know off the top of your head? I want to say there's like 8.
I don't, but all that information is really readily available. It's pretty similar. I think I actually have it here, but it's pretty there's economic geology, field methods, hydrogeology,
structural geology, engineering geology. But regardless, there's all these categories, and you basically get a plus or minus in your exam score. Say you got a 90, but you bombed economic geology. You would get a little minus in there that says like, yes, you passed, but you should really go back and look at this subject because you did not do well in this subject. So, states can look at that result as well and say like, oh yeah, they got a 90, but they have no idea what hydrology is. Well, if they're applying for a hydrologist job, that's a big deal. So they not only do you get a score, but you kind of get a little plus minus in each one of those little categories too. So that the state can, take a look at that as well. Or, and again, I'm going through that right now, so that's why I remember that. But so way back in my day, I want to say it was like 2014, I took my FG exam, and that was way back when you actually get mailed your results. And I was down the shore, and I kept getting all these calls and texts from people who I know who took the FG with me saying like, hey man, did you pass? Like, and if you passed, you got your letter in the mail. And if you failed, you got your letter in the mail like a few days later. And I did not get a letter in the mail. And I thought for sure I failed, which is a shame because I came out of that exam thinking I crushed it. Like, you have 4 hours to take this big exam. I finished it in 2 hours. I retook the whole exam again, like in another hour.
So you were like the first kid that finishes the exam. Like,
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
good.
Exactly. So then, I thought I did really well. And even that digestion after the exam, when you're talking to people and you're like, what did you get for this one? And I was like, no, you're wrong. I got this. And they're like, no, you're wrong, man. And like that happened like 4 times. I was like, oh man, what if I really was wrong all those times? No, the state board happened to mail my certificate to some lady like 2 towns over.
Oh no.
She took the presence of mind, opened it up, saw like, Steve Peterson, who is this? Like, looked me up in the phone book and
mail fraud.
Remailed it to me with like a post-it, like, this looked important, so I thought I'd mail it to you. And I was like, oh my God. Like that was how I found out I passed my fundamentals of geology.
I wish she ran into her like on job site. She was just passing herself off as a PG now.
Yeah, I got this.
This was just the FG. This was just the FG. By the time I took the PG, it was online and you could just look. And that was another funny story. I looked and I kept like, because I knew it was going to happen anytime. And it just said FG invalid. And I was like, well, does that mean I passed the PG or did I fail the PG so hard that they're going to make me take the FG again? So, but it turned out I passed. So I passed the FG with like an 89 or 90 and the PG with an 84. So
Pretty good scores.
right. Not I was,
I don't know.
no, it was definitely
room for improvement on the PG there, buddy.
it was definitely an 89 for the FG. Cause I remember thinking like being so relieved that I passed and then instantly thinking like, just one more point. It could have been a 90. Like,
You only need a 70 to pass. So.
no, I know. And it's funny because my boss like was busting my chops. Like, oh, you haven't heard yet? You probably failed. And then I told him what I got. He's like, oh, I got a 71. So there you go.
So Shannon, with having your PG, what's your typical workday like?
Well, so I'm a consultant. I've been a consulting geologist for the past 10 years of my career. And the thing I like about my job is that I'm doing something different all the time. Doing oversight on drilling projects, looking at really cool rocks and installing water supply wells for mining companies. I've been to Australia helping with a uranium mine closure project, and I've put in water supply wells.
You are glowing.
Gold mine in South America. I mean, being a geologist is such a cool job. And I think that part of the reason why I've had all these opportunities is because I've always been on the PG track, and people, even if you're very young in your career and you've taken the FG and there's, a title that goes along with that, geologist in training. I mean, they know that you're really motivated. And so a lot of really cool opportunities can come your way, You also get the landfill groundwater sampling jobs, which everyone does pretty early in their consulting career. And you just learn to hang out and use all your meters properly and troubleshoot equipment on a regular basis. So I'm much better at fixing things and taking things apart than I used to be also.
Yeah,
So-
I've had many of those days where panicking because my multi-ray won't calibrate. What am I supposed to do? And I remember like panicking, like, what am I supposed to do? And then in retrospect, like, so what?
Call your project manager.
Yeah, exactly. No, because my project manager at the time would be like, you figure it out. I've done that. I've panicked. Now you have to panic. So, which is not necessarily the right thing to do. But yeah, you're right in that there is an interesting path. Nothing's ever the same. Nothing's ever, there is something always interesting around the corner. Some other interesting project, even if it's the same thing, like drilling holes over and over and over again. It's always different stuff coming up.
Yeah. One thing that we haven't brought up yet, Chris, is that, one of the main things about holding a professional geologist license is that there's an ethical code. I mean, you're bound to protecting public health and safety. And part of public health and safety is also protecting the environment. And so, if we ever if there was ever a litigation case or something like that, we could stand up in court and, swear the oath, and our word means something because we're bound by our license to always perform work in a technically correct manner, document the work in a technically correct manner, and never do anything to endanger public safety. Like, our job is to protect the public. And so that really is what holding a license is. I mean, it has value because it basically binds you to perform your work under a certain code of ethics. That's important when you're dealing with water supply and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that isn't like, so we talked a little bit about the fundamentals of geology and about how that exam is a lot of your, your whole entire undergrad career compressed into a test. The practice of geology, the PG exam, the second 4-hour exam you have to take after you have 5 years experience. There's a lot of those questions. It is legit like a practice of geology, and I probably would have gotten a 40, a 50 in that exam if I had taken it right away out of undergrad. Like, yeah, there's some things that you still just know.
Well, that's why they don't let you take it right out.
Exactly.
They want you to have, and the education requirements do vary by state, Steve. Some states it's 8 years, some states it's 5,
Oh,
but
sorry.
some
Yes.
states will let you count 2 years of your undergrad towards that total experience. Some will let you use 1 to 2 years of your graduate studies up to that.
Right.
So it does vary by state. 5 years isn't a magical number.
Sorry. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, because it was actually 4 years of work experience, counting 1 year of my graduate degree as towards that 5 years. But you're absolutely right. But basically what I'm saying is, without actually doing the job, I would not have passed that exam. Like,
you learn a lot in the first 5 years of your career, and that's another great reason to get on the PG track right away, is because you stay focused on those goals. You have the state regulations from the state board that says this is what you need to do to get your PG exam. You can stay laser focused and really try and focus on the type of work that's going to make you a great geologist technically, and a well-rounded geologist too, because you have to be, the PG test minimum competency. And I know that seems not very prestigious, but it means that you are a good enough geologist that you understand the fundamentals and how to practice. You don't need to have 20 years of experience to get your PG exam. You need about 5,
Right.
So
and
it just tests your minimum competency. Like, do you understand the technical basics that pretty much any practicing geology would need to know to protect the public health and safety?
And when I was talking before about like structural geology, engineering geology, on the PG, the practice of geology, a big part of it is ethics. And there are some, like, you take the practice exam, it's like, you find out Joey's spilling nuclear waste behind his house. Like, what do you do? Like, yes, there's those always like easy questions like, oh yes, of course, I'm going to turn Joey in. But then there are some more very like nuanced, complicated questions that are real world, because you can tell like, oh, I had a client who was kind of like that, kind of maybe doing something like that. And, so, there are some nuanced ethical questions in that practice of geology exam that will basically weed out like, no, health and safety comes first, then your client, then making money. Like,
You really threw Joey under the bus pretty quickly.
Listen, Joey was an awful human being.
Where did he get the nuclear waste from? That's what I want to know.
Why was it in his backyard?
It happens. Some people think, back in the pre-80s, people thought using solvents as pesticides and stuff was a good idea. So there are actually a lot more of those backyard Superfund sites than you would imagine.
Oh yeah, I was at a site in PA where it was a big manufactured gas plant, like in upstate Pennsylvania. Yeah, okay, they were bad, they were dirty, but like just up the river, there was like this Joe's Body Shop who had a hole in the ground because it was like coal country, Jesse, and this hole in the ground, when like in the 50s and 60s, they would just pour oil in it and it never filled up. So they started taking in other people's oil and just dumping it down this hole.
Makes sense.
Their magic oil hole.
I don't understand what's ethically wrong with that. It's
so,
not filled yet. So,
but it was up gradient from our site, which was like a big conglomerate owned this site. Like, like they have the deep pockets, but no, it turned out like, yes, the site that we were on, there was some localized pollution. Yes. But a lot of it going into the Schuylkill River was this random mechanic shop like 2 miles away up the road who just happened to be pouring oil and oil and oil and
That
all
used to be
kinds
the
of whatever.
recommendation back in the 50s for what to do with your oil.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
The solution to pollution is dilution,
Yeah.
right? Just dump
Yes.
it in the ocean. Good to go. I don't know where it went.
yeah,
Yeah, so when I was training to process pollen, the one of the big names of pioneers in the field, he taught at Penn State, and I guess, yeah, I want to say in the 50s, he would process pollen in his backyard. He would just have like milk jugs with HF, and he would just be processing pollen.
It's really strong acid. Okay.
Yep. And just dumping it out in his yard, and you know, you got to get the pollen somehow. So
yeah. I have a good post podcast story about HF. If you know.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Keep it for the Patreon people.
Yeah, exactly.
I dabbled in consulting for a solid 24 months, and I mostly worked with homeowners, heating oil tank leaks and stuff like that. And we had a issue at a homeowner's property with diesel fuel. So we cleaned all that up, dig it all out, and then we're doing the final groundwater tests, and it hits for TCE. So for the listeners that don't know what TCE is, it's this compound. It's very carcinogenic. It's used in dry cleaners. It's a degreasing agent. And we're looking at this, we're like, how is this pinging for TCE right now? It's, like, is there something going on in the neighborhood? And we're like looking around for, whatever, all the,
Doing like
suspects.
a phase 1 investigation of like,
just like real quick, because we're like, we're trying to close this project out, and why is this pinging for TCE? Turns out homeboy is a amateur mechanic, and he was working on his cars in his backyard.
using like brake clean and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And he's just dumping the TCE on his lawn. And so it went down, percolated through, and we're trying to close out the project. It pings for TCE, and
yep.
So there was some friction trying to close that project out. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah,
what happened with that. But
I am totally touting this stat without actually knowing it, but I want to say I heard that like 1 tablespoon of gasoline will contaminate like 10,000 gallons of water. So it doesn't take much TCE to contaminate groundwater. And TCE also like degrades, like most stuff when it degrades into like simpler stuff that's not so bad. No, TCE degrades into PCE and like all kinds of stuff that's even worse for you. So
it's all dry cleaner, they're just like hot zones. But I remember when we lived at a place, and on the corner there was a dry cleaner, and they went out of business, and within a month it had turned into a restaurant. I was like, I don't.
Well, it depends if they send their clothes out. Like if they're actually doing the dry cleaning on site, then it could be an issue. But if they're sending it out to an off-site place, the restaurant's fine.
Ruins my story though. So
I know a property owner in Jersey.
I'm sorry.
There was this property in Jersey, and it was like this mom and pop shop. Like they came over from like South Korea or something in like the 60s, and they started a dry cleaning business, and now the daughter owns it. And it's a very affluent neighborhood in Jersey, but the property is worthless because it's got like $1 million worth of remediation that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And they can't sell it. They can't do anything with this property except for maintain the business because carry on.
Is that still the environmental regulations? Like if you purchase a property with contamination issues, you inherit all of those issues, right?
I think it varies from state to state, but most states are like
because that's why they make you do phase ones.
Exactly. You can't be an innocent purchaser. Like if I bought a house, and for all intents and purposes, it looked like a house, it's always been a house, and then I buy the house, I can claim innocent purchaser. In a lot of states, if it turned out they were running like a meth lab and dumping chemicals down the drain for decades.
I don't know if it counts for commercial properties though, which is why you do the phase ones for commercial properties. And if there is contamination, a lot of the times you can strike some sort of trust or some type of legal agreement and work with the state to come up with some sort of funding source to mitigate whatever contamination
like
may or may not be there.
Brownfield or different. Yeah, there are different avenues you can go.
Sometimes the company who sells it will put a huge chunk of money into a trust that will take care of a lot of those fees for the next 20 years or something.
Yep.
So for the listeners that don't know what a phase one is, and this is actually something I wish that I knew when I was in college.
So.
Yeah. So
It's the first phase.
Oh.
Uno.
All right.
Moving on.
So it's when like for when there's a real estate transaction, the banks would not go through with the purchase unless you do. It's basically an environmental historical report. You do all of your due diligence. You go through the deeds. You do a walkthrough. You see any potential environmental concerns. And the big thing is you have to do a search with the State Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP. You'll send something out to the EPA. Is there any records? And then a record search from the city, the municipalities. It's a record search is what it is. I remember we had to go back. I would have to go to the county offices and I do a deed search back as far as we could go. For some of these properties, we were following deeds back to the 1800s.
Yeah, I briefly worked for the state of New Jersey, and I remember up in the Highlands in northern Jersey, most of the homeowners had water wells, and the levels of arsenic were really high in these wells, and my job at the time was basically to figure out where it was coming from, because it was like the original, I think Ford had a paint plant there was a battery plant, but there was also old mines, but arsenic is occurs naturally in rock. And so I had to figure out, basically they wanted to know who was on the hook. Because if they could blame it on like a mine or on a factory or something, you could say like, well, it's this company. If it's natural, well, then the state has to step in and basically pay.
Mm-hmm.
So the mines were like from the early 1900s, late 1800s. So like,
wow,
nothing was in business anymore.
Yeah, sure. I once did a phase one at a paintball, like a paintball field, or I don't know where you go paintballing at. I don't know.
Abandoned houses in Chester.
Yeah. People outside of Pennsylvania don't know how much fun Chester is. Just think of, I don't know. It's not a nice neighborhood. So we're doing this. I
went to high school in Chester. There's nothing wrong with Chester.
Well, I'm sure back in the 1800s when you went to high school, it was pleasant. You showed up on your horse and, So we had to figure out, we're looking around there like there's paintballs all over the place. And like, my job was to find the toxicity of paintballs.
Did you know it was a paintball place, or were you just confused?
No. I knew it was a paintball place, when we were doing the walkthrough. And so I'm looking up all this information about paintballs, and apparently it's like a laxative. But the thing that I came across was the place that we were doing this thing on. They had a paintball eating contest every year. So person that downs the most amount of paintballs in X amount of time was the winner. And so we looked at that. We're like, well, I guess no one keeled over, and it's just kind of a laxative. So the thumbs up. It was good to go.
Maybe that's why they're not in business anymore.
Yeah, maybe
right?
That's why. I don't know. There's nothing ethical wrong with that, with what I did, right? I mean, nobody was hurt from the paintball eating contest. So
no, but that is an interesting, like phase ones, phase twos. Like what do they mean? What are, like, these are all things that I had no idea.
Yeah, you don't learn that as an undergrad. It's just like, I remember interviewing for my right out of undergrad. I had a consulting gig for 2 years. And I remember interviewing for these consulting gigs, and they're throwing all these terms out. Oh, we do phase one and stuff like that. I didn't even know what the word due diligence meant after I graduated college, right? So I'm going to these interviews, and I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. You're just yesing and find out on day one of work like what you're actually doing, and
No, I learned that at my OSHA 40 hour, like what a PID was. Like, what a
photo
multi-ray
ionization
was.
detector, is that?
Yeah, exactly. That's
I
right.
remember. It's been about solid
Basically
10 years.
it sucks air in. It runs the air past basically a giant light bulb, and there's a detector on the other side, and it tells you how many volatiles are in the air. It doesn't tell you what's in the air; it just tells you how many volatiles are in the air.
Yeah, I remember because we would do get the PID and get a Sharpie marker just to test it to make sure it's working, and the Sharpie marker sets it off.
Yeah, that's what you call a bump test.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it's just it tells you if there's like diesel fuel or just anything that
any
has
volatiles.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell you what volatiles because
something's going on in there.
Right, which is a little misleading. You're like, oh, it's only reading like 10 on the PID. Well, is it 10 parts per million benzoate because that's real bad. Like it doesn't tell you what the 10 is. It just tells you that it's 10. So you just keep that in mind, all you young geologists listening. So Shannon, let's say you just graduated college yesterday or 2 weeks ago. What's your recommendation?
Well, my recommendation would be to go to the State Board's Geology Board website and look up the regulations. This is in your junior year. This is before your senior year. And see what classes are required to take the FG exam. See what requirements that there are to take the PG exam. We didn't really talk about study guides at all, so I'll touch on those right now.
No, we can absolutely touch on those because
there are lots of third-party companies that claim to be the go-to study guide, and people can feel free to consider those. They tend to cost a lot of money.
Yes.
Really what you want to do is you want to go to the ASBOG website, and they have this thing called the Candidate Handbook.
Yes.
And this is the document that you want to obtain and hold very close to your heart the whole time that you're studying for your exam. Because what it does is that it's a very transparent document. It tells you what percentage of what geology topics are in the FG and in the PG. And really, your best study guides are the textbooks that you've already paid for.
Yes.
There's no real reason to go pay for third-party study guides unless you're a super audio learner or something like that. But your geo textbooks are going to get you through your FG. That's all you need. I still have
mine right behind me.
Bust out your physical geology, bust out your historical geology, mineralogy and structural geology, and read away. And you will, you have to put in the time, but you don't need to go paying tons of money to these third-party companies. I mean, ASBOG provides all the information that you need to study for the exam.
So my experience with that, I took all the practice exams that the ASBOG offered, and they were pretty spot on. I did take a class with a company that was awesome. They did a great job. It did cost a lot of money to my company, but so it didn't cost me a lot of money. But that company took basically all the aspects of the exam and then just made them a lot harder. So it made the exam seem like way harder than it was going to be, which helped me as a person studying wise, because then when I went to the exam, it was easy peasy. Like the exam really was kind of what that ASBOG handbook said it was going to be. So
I mean, there's only one sanctioned place to study, and that's all the information that ASBOG tells you need to study for.
Exactly. Yes.
It's about accessibility too. Not everyone can afford hundreds of dollars for a study session.
Absolutely.
You've already paid the money for your books, or you can go rent them from your college library for free. And
honestly, your local library, like chances are, all right, I graduated a year ago, like call your local library up. Be like, I need that Tarbuck and Lookins Earth book, volume whatever, because I don't really care, because it's a lot of the same information from volume 2 to volume 12. So just get me that book and, look up your mineralogy, that green mineralogy textbook we all have.
Does the FG and the PG exams, they cost money, right?
Yes.
They do. Some departments will pay for their seniors to do it. That's pretty rare. Most companies, if you work for a company like a consulting company, they will pay the fee for your PG or your FG, or not your FG, but usually for your PG. The prices are pretty consistent, but they still vary by state. I think the FG is somewhere around $150, and I think the PG is somewhere around $200 or $250. But again, that
That
kind of
sounds about
varies by
right.
state.
Yep.
So a person could save up for it, and if you could save up and get that FG and then work for a company, they're probably going to pay for your PG exam because they want you. It's to their benefit for you to have that PG. And kind of on that topic, when you want to go do your applications, you need to keep in mind that state boards typically only get together 2, maybe 4 times per year. And the exam is only offered twice a year, once in March and once in October. And that's all states who administer it across the board. They offer it on the same day.
At the same time. Yeah.
For now, things may change in the future if the exam ever moves to an electronic base, but for right now, it's still a paper and pencil exam, and it's all administered on the same day. And so when you fill out the application to take the exams, either the FG or the PG, a lot of the agencies who are involved recommend doing it completing your application at least 8 weeks before the exam to give the licensing board proper time to review your application. And then if there's anything that needs cleared up before the exam, you will have time to make any clarifications to the board if they have questions. The state boards aren't overfunded by the state agencies. I mean, their staffing is pretty slim most of the time. And so, you want to get on the good side of the administrator who's processing your paperwork, and you want to give yourself at least 8 weeks.
Yeah. For example, the exams are usually offered in March or October or November every year. And for Pennsylvania, in order to be eligible to take it in November, I had to submit all my stuff by like June 15th. And then
a lot earlier than 8 weeks.
Yes. But then that was, like Shannon said, that was because then there was a little bit of back and forth, like, oh, I got your transcript, but I didn't get this, or I someone didn't send in their recommendation letter or something like, so there is a big window. So just honestly, just plan on 6 months before you want to take the exam, make sure you have all your ducks in a row, and
then start studying.
And it's such a cliche, but you really do need to study, and studying with somebody may help you, may not. I was good myself. I could study with one other person and bounce ideas back off of them. But when I got in a study group, I got scatterbrained and it didn't really work well for me. So whatever works for you, just figure out, what your best brand of knowledge learning is and get to it. But it is very comprehensive. So make sure you're ready for it. I think Chris and Jesse should sign up and take the FG exam. What do you think, Shannon?
We could have a contest.
I think they'd pass.
I think we should have a contest. See who can beat Steve's score from 2014.
Yeah, but it's a different test every year.
Come on. Oh, did you beat me? Did you, Shannon?
They didn't actually give me a number. They just gave me all the plus and minuses.
What?
The FG part. Not all state gives you your test score. For the PG they will, but not for the FG.
No, and that is another good point. Like, I was taking my exam in Pennsylvania with a lot of people from like Ohio, and like New York at the time wasn't offering the exam. So there are 18 states out there that don't offer this exam, but it's still important even if you don't live in a state that is an ASBOG state.
So New Jersey still doesn't offer it, right?
No, New Jersey
they do not. They have an environmental professional license, and I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure what it's called.
It's the LSRP, the Licensed State Remediation Professional. And,
That's right. Yeah.
That's a weird thing where you're actually like personally liable.
Yeah, and I knew.
You mess up something, but to this date, I don't think anybody's ever been sued to be like take away your
first
house
person, though.
or car or whatever. But it's essentially the PG. But no, I shouldn't say that. It's not essentially the PG because there's a lot of. You don't need to have any sort of. I don't want to speak out of turn,
it's a
but
license that's intertwined. It's built into the state regulations and the state like Superfund, the state voluntary cleanup program. Like this license is built-in
But there are a lot less
submittals and
geological
things like that.
requirements.
It's more environmental. Yeah. So, I mean, some states do, they have similar licenses
Mhm.
that are not the PG, but they're more environmental related.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting with Jersey. Jersey's got the most Superfund sites in the country, and they don't have the PG. It was always, I remember when because I did my consulting work mostly in New Jersey, that little bit that I did dabble, and they had, back in the day, it was the subsurface evaluator's license. And
Yes.
and then
I think they still have that.
do they? Okay. And then they were going towards that licensed
The
professional.
LSRP, yeah.
And I remember I sat in a couple like seminars about that, and people were losing their minds, because they're all worried, like, what if you sign off on this project, say it's you have some type of contamination issue or whatever, and you're the geologist that signs off on the project, and then all of a sudden they find there's another plume of contamination that everybody missed. And it's like, well, am I going to be held liable to?
It's
And they were really nervous
basically
about
like,
that.
are you grossly negligent? Did you just sign some papers? Yes, then you're on the hook. If not, then that's life. Life is always full of caveats.
I mean, even with your PG, you can be held personally liable if you
yes,
do
that's
something
true.
that
Yes.
is egregiously negligent or falsification of documents or something like that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you're a jerk, they're going to find you, basically.
I mean, with any license, license, you're saying I'm living up to this code, and if you don't, then you can be prosecuted.
Now, I know, Shannon, in California, you have to take an extra exam. Are there any other states that you know of where you have to take an extra exam to be a PG in that state?
So California does administer the ASBOG exam, but they do have a separate one that I think is geared a little bit more towards geohazards because of all the seismic activity that goes on in California. I do not think that there's any other test. Some states have a separate or an additional license that tacks on to the geology for like geophysicists.
Okay.
And some have hydrogeologists add-ons to your license. Like I think Washington State does. But so I think there are additional exams, but all of the states that have the PG license use the ASBOG exam.
Yeah, and there's 38 now. I want to say when I took my FG, there was 26.
I think there's 32 states.
Oh, I'm sorry, 32. Yes, 32.
And one state, which is Michigan, has the FG but not the PG portion. But they want to get their students ready. I
think there's two states now that offer the FG. I want to say it's Michigan and one other. I could be wrong, but
there is even a PG license in Puerto Rico.
Yes, I did see that.
They administer the ASBOG exam, which is very cool. And I think some of the ASBOG exam has been added to some states recently, such as Tennessee and Louisiana, or did not used to have it, but now they do. So
yeah, I want to say there was like, was it okay? Arizona was in 1956, California was in 68, and then like Delaware was 72, and then there was a few in the like late 70s, but then like the 80s and 90s is when like most of those.
Well, that's when licensure
states.
That's when licensure became a state issue, and a lot of career licenses came out in the early 60s through mid 80s.
Yeah. It was it's pretty interesting time, I guess. That's you had OSHA and Superfund and this, and there was a lot of things going on then. So it makes sense that it was just interesting. I have no idea if Arizona was the first state, but it said
I think they were. I think they were the first.
They adopted it in 1956. I'm like, 56?
Mm-hmm.
Goodness gracious, people.
Wasn't there something, I could be completely wrong, but was there something that if for some states, if you had the PE license, then you automatically were given a PG license? No? Okay.
No. Forget those engineers. They're dead to me.
There's been a lot of back and forth between and some contention between PE and PG licenses. The geologists had to work very hard for a long time to get their license in New York State, and they after having to work with the engineers, there's a lot of overlap in what we do, and in order for the engineers to kind of make space for the PGs, that there has to be clear boundaries between the two professions.
Yes. Just for example, in my old career, for 5 years of consulting, if you were an engineer and you were a geologist, for the first 5 years of your career, chances are you're doing the exact same thing. You're writing the same reports, you're drilling the same holes, you're taking the same samples, you're doing all the same things, except the engineer makes like 15 to 20% more than you. that was the big difference. Yeah.
Some people do have both their PE and their PG.
Yes.
That's because they have maybe a major in engineering and a minor in geological engineering or engineering geology or something like that.
Yes.
Or they have 2 degrees. They have a degree in geology and engineering. So
a buddy of mine in my old company, Andy, hopefully you're listening. We called him the double threat because he had his degree in his master's degree, I think, was in like geophysics or something, which was like, basically he had enough credits to take the PE and the PG, and he did. And
they're special people.
No,
they tend to be really smart. I have to say.
This dude was brilliant. He did a lot of dam engineering, like not just dam engineering, but like literally
dam
like
engineering,
engineering,
holding back water
engineer.
engineering. Yeah. So no, and honestly, one of the nicest dudes I ever met. So obviously not an engineer. All
right, you're really
that was a burn
job
on an engineer. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. So,
well, I've hit most of my high points that I wanted to cover today.
And I just hit some low points, so that's good.
That's good. Steve's
You're
always
always
hitting low points in this
Steve.
podcast. This is what you see what we have to deal with every week, Shannon. This is
No, but that is a good point. Like, we had a few listeners say like, "Oh, I listen to you guys. I'm studying for my PG." Like, this was years ago, and I remember thinking like, God, I hope this helps. I'm not sure if it will, but
and I am gonna give you guys some links to put up with this episodes, to some major resources that people can use that will help guide them through their journey considering becoming a licensed professional geologist. And so we just want to give them some of the basics to get them pointed in the right direction.
No, and that is a big deal. Like we have some academic advisors at institutions that I've been associated with, and they've, the academic advisor kind of that job shifts from professor to professor over the years, and some of them have different focuses than others, but I try to, input my 2 cents and say like, make sure that these students know that the PG is a big deal. Like, I work with people who, they didn't take the proper classes when they were in undergrad, and now they can't get their PG, and they feel like they can't ever get their PG. I mean, they can go back and take those classes, but it's really hard to do once you're a professional and you have your, 40-hour week job. It's hard to like, I need structural geology. Well, I can't take every Tuesday, Thursday off from 10 to 12 to go take the structural geology class. So it is a big deal to get it done when you can get it done. Don't just skip that structure class because that's the hard one or something like that. Don't just skip Calc 2 because you took it 4 times already.
Is that a very specific number you're throwing out there,
just saying. No, Calc 2 was only twice. Calc 1 was 4 times. But that's what I'm saying. Like it would have been easy just to take that other route, but the PG route really does open doors. It opens opportunities. You can sign and seal documents. You are a very important person. You're a VIP.
Gives you a lot of flexibility in your career too. In a lot of states, oil and gas geologists are exempt, so they do not need to have a license. But that industry fluctuates quite a bit over the course of time. It kind of goes through its ups and downs. And what happens is that a lot of those geologists go into other sectors during the bust periods, and they don't have their license, and they get really upset about it because they feel like they have equal qualifications as the practicing licensed geologists. And so I say, what's it hurt to take the exam?
Exactly.
It doesn't cost that much to maintain your license. And so,
So
the
what's
economy shifts and the economy changes. So, I mean, if you have it, it's just another card to play in your pocket.
Yes.
So that's a good point. What are the continuing education requirements for the PG?
Again, they vary by state pretty wildly. I think I don't know which states
isn't it just
require them.
Like for the majority of states, it's like you go to like a seminar or two a year for the most part.
So the states that do require them require somewhere between 8 and 16 continuing education hours per year. Sometimes 1 or 2 of those need to be in ethics. But again, like some states it's 12, some states it's 15, and some states the continuing education requirements vary. Like sometimes you can just go to your local geological society meetings and sit in on their presentation, and that's an hour. Sometimes if somebody comes into your company and does a lunchtime presentation, that's an hour. Usually it's pretty flexible. And so they're typically not very hard to meet. And especially if you're going to like one conference a year or something, typically you can get most of your credits in one shot. So there's some double whammies. I mean, they just kind of want you to staying well-rounded and, you know, kind of learning about new things that aren't necessarily in your one little narrow field that you've created your little niche. They kind of just want people to stay branched out and well-rounded.
So you're licensed in Texas and Georgia. Can you take
which is interesting.
Can you take a continuing ed that counts for both?
So Georgia doesn't require continuing education credits right now, and Texas does. Texas does, but I was really active with my local geological society when I lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and so when I went to apply for reciprocity with Texas, I could provide all of those credits, even though I didn't need them for Georgia. Texas accepted them, and you know, some state that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get them if you are licensed in a state. Sometimes the state that you're applying for reciprocity with will grant you a grace period or something, and they say, well, you have like 1 year to catch up, or it's so wild. I mean, that's why it's a really good thing to be in contact with the board, so you can tell them what, you know, you can give them all the information that you have. And if you didn't know you needed continuing education credits and you submitted your application and they'd be like, well, what is this person doing? They didn't even call us, you know?
Yeah, I contacted the guy at Delaware and he's like, oh, you know Shannon George. And I was like, yes, I do. Well, will that get me any points or anything? He's like, no.
Maybe. Probably not.
I should mention, thinking about continuing ed, because like Steve and I go to this, it's a field conference every year in Pennsylvania, and it counts for 12 continuing ed credits. So it usually fills up pretty quickly. But like in Pennsylvania, there's a council of professional geologists, and they have a conference every year, and they usually do like classes every now and then and networking events. And, you know, you have to be a professional geologist to be part of it. And so, you know, it opens those doors as well. You know, say you want to, you have your PG and you want to go to a new job. Well, now you have this whole network of people you can talk to and maybe open some doors.
That's part of the value of the conferences, and that's why conferences are typically accepted as continuing education credits, because you are talking about work going on in other places, and it's just another way to stay up on current events in our industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's the American Institute of Professional Geologists, AIPG. There's, you know, like Jesse said, there's, you know, and that conference in Pennsylvania, that's just fun. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. It's just fun. Like, it's super interesting. You go on fun field trips. Like,
who doesn't want to go on a field trip? We all need to go on more field trips anyway.
Oh, tell me about it.
The best geologists have seen the most rocks, right? So.
You know what? I'm gonna get that tattooed on my back, I think. That is an awesome saying.
I'll post it to the website when you get that done, right?
Yes. That is fantastic. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for talking with us. This has been fantastic, eye-opening. Hopefully that we have a lot of young listeners out there who are budding geologists who now can, you know,
it gives them like something to, like guidance, you know, and
it's like Poison said, gives you something to believe in.
There you go. Exactly. Took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. Come on. 90s pop rock? Come on.
Of course.
Am
No,
I
but I think
dating myself?
Who doesn't like some 90s pop rock? Come on. But no, I think it's super important because
Jesse's looking it up like, poison what?
Because
Give me something to believe in.
he looks very concerned right now. I don't know what's happening.
they're from Pennsylvania, Mechanicsburg.
Poison?
No, they started in '83.
Yes, I know, but something to believe in was from the 90s. Or maybe late 80s, but I want to say early 90s.
Oh,
Come on, Google it. Something to believe in.
Oh boy.
Anyway.
This is this is what we fact check. We've been talking for the last hour and a half, and you're fact checking poison.
Yes, exactly.
Major fundamental flaws with this podcast. No, I'm sorry.
All right. So Shannon, you got like 3 minutes left. Give us a crazy environmental consulting story.
No.
No. She's too
It's all
professional.
unicorns.
See, no.
It's all unicorns and butterflies. Everything
No.
works out.
What that
I
tells
don't know
me
what
is
you mean by crazy. Okay, the biggest pumping test I ever did, it was supposed to be a 72-hour pumping test, but we filled up all the water tanks in like 36 hours, and we had to shut this really massive pumping test down. And there was all kinds of different stations and people in different places that had to shut valves and things. So that was pretty exciting. We're like, oh, there's a lot of water.
holy cow, yeah.
1,500 gallons per minute. We got to slow it down really quickly
Wow.
before the tanks overflow. I mean, it was potable water, so it was fine. But
Oh,
it
all
was
right.
pretty. And right before that happened, I had gotten all this water in my boots. Like both of my field boots decided to blow out at the same time. And so my feet were wet for like 3 hours before we could finish the work, and it was a pretty tough day.
That sounds awful. Yeah.
I just remember like when I would do field work in the consulting gig, there would be days where it'd be like 12 degrees out, and I just like being outside. And I would take that 12-degree day any day of the week over having like a cubicle job, or it's, every single day you're just.
No, there were some days it was pretty like you get to a site and they had plowed the site, but they had plowed all the snow over the well that you have to sample.
Wow.
So yeah, it snowed 6 inches, but now there's 12 feet of snow over top of your well.
I mean, there was one day I was working on a farm field and I pulled off 35 ticks off of me.
Well, yeah, but so who messed up there with the permeability of that aquifer or the
it was gangbusters. It did so much better than we thought it would. It was like the best well on site, and I got.
I guess you were hoping for that then.
Yeah, it was
so it
great.
wasn't like a drawdown test. It was just like a pump test.
It was a 72-hour pumping test that ended early due to massive productivity. The client was pretty happy.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
What about the neighbors? When all their wells went dry, were they mad?
Everyone's working together on that one.
No. Very cool. Yeah, holy cow. What do you have, like frac tanks? Like 1,500 gallons a minute.
Yeah, there was 3 tanks. They were millions of gallons.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Now, I was on a site once. It was a paper mill, and they wanted to. It happened to be a paper mill, like an old paper mill from the 1800s, and the Marcellus Shale gas line was running like right next to it. So they knew this paper mill had all this water, so they wanted to tap into the Marcellus Shale gas and create a power plant, because also the power grid happened to be right there. And that was my biggest test. But they happened to have like a fire suppression, like 500,000 gallon tank on site, and I had to pump 1,500 gallons a minute. And I call on the project manager, like, yeah, it's pumping about 1,450 gallons a minute. Like the pump itself was maxed out at 1,500 gallons a minute. He's like, what? I'm like, yep. And we're not drawing down anything. Like we drew down a foot initially, and then it stayed there, and then just pumping and pumping. I'm like, we're gonna fill this tank. We're gonna fill this tank. Like, no, just keep pumping. I'm like, we're gonna eventually I just had to stop it. I was like, we filled the tank. Like, no, you didn't. I was like, yes, we did. And then but you have to take all these water quality parameters because it was an old paper mill, so we didn't know if it was potable water or not. So then I came back like 2 weeks later, and like the caretaker had just, you know, gotten rid of the water.
It's disappeared.
It turned out
It probably evaporated. That's where it went, right? I'm sure.
The water went away before we got the test results. Thank goodness. When we got the test results, everything was fine. Like there was nothing in the water, luckily. But still like, where did that 500,000 gallons of water go? What are you talking about?
Yeah, what happened?
So that luckily, you know, that was not an ethical call that I had to make, because it turned out that the water wasn't bad. But yeah, so we didn't have to turn anybody in or anything. Nobody got arrested. Let's put it that way. But good times pumping lots and lots of water out of the ground when, you know, my boots were dry though. It was freezing cold. It was in the middle of winter. So
it's tough when your boots are wet.
No, yeah, I don't. Yeah, that sucked. But anywho, well, thank you so much, Shannon, for being on. We really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity too, guys. I think professional geologist licensure is something I'm really passionate about. And so it was great to be invited on to your podcast today.
Thanks.
Thank you for being on. We really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Make sure you look
Very
up
informative.
your ASBOG. Make sure you look up your test questions and your practice questions. And actually on the ASBOG website, you can literally like click on your state and it gives you links to your state board of geologists and what the requirements are and all that stuff. So
we'll make sure that you guys get the link to the ASBOG, and then people can just click from there and get to where they need to go.
There you go. So forget ASBOG. Just come to Geology Flannelcast, then click on that link after you watch our YouTube video and submit some money on Patreon.
And hit like.
And hit like.
all
that
likes.
All that, and then go to the ASBOG website. Mm-hmm. Got it.
I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, Shannon. So our website's geologyflannelcast.com. Go check us out. Like I said, we'll post the links up that Shannon gives us. We got a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/geologyflannelcast. Check us out on Twitter at geoflannelcast. Help if you want to help out with the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/geologyflannelcast. We've been posting extra videos from the guests we've had and all sorts of stuff that's not available on YouTube. So you can go if you become let's see, that's called the quartz tier member. So watch out.
Yeah.
But no, if you just want to help us out a little bit, paying the bills around the house.
We'll hook you up with a sticker. Hang on.
Sticker. Steve's got this. I saw that. You had that in the background the entire time.
Oh, that's awesome.
We'll hook you up with those. Don't worry, Shannon.
Shannon, send us your address. We'll hook you up with a few.
Yeah.
You can put them on your mugs.
Yeah.
Not that your umbrella mug wasn't cool, but you know.
Well, Steve, you didn't
It will not survive the dishwasher, by the way. Sorry. What were you?
I'm gonna have to move to quartz level just so I can get that sticker.
No, you get stickers if you just the lowest tier. Anybody that helps out on Patreon gets stickers. Steve's got the T-shirt, the Geology Flannelcast, another Geology Flannelcast T-shirt.
Yes, I'd like to say this one. The last one was from my brother. My brother made that. It was pretty sweet. This one is from the Formatting Formula. Actually sent me a shirt. They're like, here you go. Thanks for being a supporter. I was like, thank you for being a supporter. So
yeah,
very cool. And honestly, they sent me one and said, we want to know if it fits before we send it to Chris and Jesse. Because,
whoa,
yeah,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, I said it does, but
no, you said it doesn't, so we don't get ones. Just so you're the only one.
No, I'm just. They had sent me one years and years ago, and they contacted me and said, like, how come you don't wear that Geology Flannelcast polo that we sent you? And I said, because I'm a lot fatter than I was 6 years ago. And it just doesn't fit. So too many beers and kids, lack of exercise.
You're eating kids?
You know, they're high in calories. I don't know. What can I say? Anyhow. Yeah. So Shannon, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we're good. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you guys next week. We got another guest, secret guest.
Ooh,
next week.
Can't wait. All right.
I don't even know who the guest is yet. Somebody's coming on the show next week.
It's another Chris, I believe.
Ooh,
Another Chris S.
there can only be one.
Anyway. All right. Thanks, everybody. Keep
All
listening.
right. Take care. Love you guys. Bye.